Yeah, perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys. I can't see you online, but I know you're there, so appreciate you logging on. And we do have snacks in person, so we can't give them to you online, but appreciate you logging on to hear our workshop today. So my name is Brett Christoph. I work as a professional skills coordinator for the Office of Career Services here at USask. And I've been partnering with Jordan and the Society for Undergraduate Research. I see I have the old name up on there. I haven't updated that since before. Been working to support student researchers in summer research positions for the last few years. And so I'm here to kind of talk to you about some strategies and some tips for working on a team. Research is a really great career exploration opportunity. Even if you don't end up working in research for your career, there's some really great skill building that happens in research, really great networking, really all about who you know, not what you know sometimes. And so really important kind of professional development opportunity for you folks. And so part of that is working on a team. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about some strategies, and I have some resources for you at the end. As usual, would like to begin by acknowledging the land which we are privileged to call our home, where we work, play, learn, the Treaty 6 territory, the traditional homelands of the Métis. And like Jordan, I like to take a moment starting with this land acknowledgement to really ground ourselves in the topic that we're going to be looking at today, which is about collaboration and constructive dialogue, and land acknowledgements and the process of reconciliation and indigenization of our home are collaborative processes. And so there's some skill in working together, working across differences, working across distance. These are collaborative skills. And so acknowledging the land acknowledges our shared responsibility for co-creating a future where we all can flourish, including the lands and all that claim us on the land. A part of my work is supporting students in developing the USask student competencies. So these are the 6 kind of skills or knowledge, skills, and attributes that we hope that USask students leave this institution with experience under their, alongside their your piece of paper that says you have a degree or a certificate from USask. We also hope that you'll have experience in engaging in intercultural society, nurturing successful relationships, so that collaboration and teamwork piece, leveraging technology, which is not always easy, as we learned, but using it effectively and ethically to improve our work, being able to communicate meaningfully for different purposes and different audiences, being adaptable in our problem solving and approaches to design. And as well as the pillar of all of these competencies is cultivating well-being. So really centering our well-being and the well-being of our community so that we can really succeed in all the different work that we have to do and support the other competencies that we have that we're using in our daily lives. So these are competencies that you already have experience with, but we hope that by kind of naming them and giving you some strategies behind them, you'll be able to lean into those even more, no matter what your career path looks like. I had a little poll here, and it's not going to come up, of course, but I was wanting to ask you, how would you describe a good teammate? A good team member? What are the skills? What are the attributes? If you want to just pop them in the chat, it was meant to be, oh yeah, you could scan this if you have a phone, and you can pop in your answers. But if you also just want to put them in the chat, just to kind of get some kind of descriptive words on what qualities we think of when we think of a good teammate or a good team member. You can either pop them in the chat or you can scan that QR code if you aren't already using your phone. Yeah, let's see. So the question is, what skills or qualities make a good team member? Yeah, I'm seeing some accountable communicator. Yeah. Open communication suite. We have some people on the poll as well. Good listener. Yeah, that's a good part of communication too, right? Consistent boundaries. Yeah, that's a piece of the well-being as well, right? Um, knowing your work, knowing when it's time for work, but also putting your work down when it's time to not be working. Nonviolent communication works well. Yeah. So understanding, having some emotional intelligence, also some understanding of diversity, right? Knowing that different people respond to stress differently or communicate differently. And that might be influenced by, culture or experience or upbringing or just personality, right? So kind of, being open-minded to different communication approaches. Time management, yeah, being responsible for your time. Open-minded, yeah. Hardworking, I would add. Those are my favorite teammates. Awesome. Great. I think we got kind of a nice list. Keep thinking about that, right? Because the qualities that we want to see in our teammates should also be the qualities that we're working on having ourselves, right? So it's one thing to be like, oh, that person's a bad teammate. But if we're also not being good communicators and being open-minded and having good time management, then maybe we're the teammate that's not pulling their weight, right? So thinking about these different qualities as we're working on a team to kind of model the behavior that we want to see in our teammates. So thank you for that. You all passed. That was great. Where am I here? Oops. There we go. Um, so there's lots of different components to thinking about a team, but there's some really important pillars, right? Of course, your leadership is a big part of that. You also hope that you're in a collaborative environment where people are encouraging you to ask questions, share your ideas, be respectful, and foster that kind of teamwork dynamic. Having clear goals and objectives is also really important. We'll talk a little bit about that because sometimes you don't know the objective or the goal, so you can just ask, right? But you don't want to just be, doing something without having a clear goal in mind. So really clarifying kind of that purpose of the objective of why the team is meeting together. That could be in your schoolwork, that could be in your lab this summer, that could be in your part-time job. And then having diverse experience is also really important. When you have diverse people on your team, you have diverse ideas, you have diverse ways to problem solve. It can make it maybe there might be more time for conversation and question asking, but ultimately having more diverse experience and expertise helps that team to succeed in different ways. This is a little joke because I'm sure if I asked you if you guys like working on a team, you might have some horror stories of times where you were working on a dysfunctional team, right? Where that's that one person that's doing 99% of the work, right? Not having clear boundaries, not having good constructive dialogue skills. There's that one person who has no idea what's going on. There's someone that says they're going to help but never actually ends up doing it. And somebody that just is just impossible to reach until the very end. And then, sometimes they claim all the work even though they've done nothing, right? So that's not every team. That's a dysfunctional team. And sometimes we have to kind of go through those dysfunctions before we know what actually we want to see in a functional team. The reality is teamwork is inevitable. We can't always choose who's on our team or who we work with. But once you get your job outside of university, once you finish your degree and you get your career path, you're going to be working with others. I've yet to learn of a job where you're not working with others in some capacity. So that's either you're working alongside colleagues or you're working for a client or you have a boss or direct supervisor. There's always going to be some other person that you are connecting with, even as an entrepreneur, right? Especially as an entrepreneur. So we need to get a good handle of how to be good collaborators. And there's lots of strategies, lots of best practices for including improving collaboration through today we're going to talk about communication and what we call constructive dialogue. This is a pyramid of 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. This is actually something my team at my office has used to help us, because it really shows kind of what the foundation of a strong team is. And trust is really important while working on a team. Conflict is also a part of working on a team because it allows us to talk through ideas and ask questions, right? It's not like fighting conflict, but it's, asking those tough questions, and making sure that we're getting to those results. So the end is the result. The top of the triangle is the result, but we can't really get there without some of those other pieces, right? So we see accountability, which we came through, and time management and being punctual. Commitment is, being passionate about your work, knowing what your role is, being able to deliver on that. The conflict piece comes with trust, right? Being able to ask questions, ask for clarity. And a team that kind of works more functionally or more cohesively is usually a more fun and more successful team to work on. I won't spend too much time there. Okay, so I have a self-assessment for you guys to do. So I'll give you a couple minutes. All of this is available in the Fusion modules, which you have access to as sure participants this summer. So if we're going over anything too fast, I would encourage you to get in those online modules, and you'll have access to all of these kind of assessment tools as well as strategies that we'll talk about a little bit later. So what I'd like you to do is just kind of jot down, give yourself a little score as to where you feel or how often you practice these skills that are related to collaboration. So 1 is you never do this. 5 is you always do this. Hopefully we're somewhere in the middle. And I'm not going to ask you to share your results. This is private information. This is for you to know. So lying is only going to be lying to yourself. So be honest. You can see my personality come through where I really have a hard time marking always, because I know myself. And I know that always, and I know the reality is always is a little impossible to reach, right? So I'm usually always in that four category, right? So don't, just be honest with how you feel you show these skills in your work, in your daily life. So I'll give you a second to kind of read through those. You'll notice that there's different areas, which are also just different components of collaborating and working on a team. Okay, so I participate actively and accept a fair share of group work. I work skillfully on assigned tasks and complete them on time. I give timely and constructive feedback to my team members in appropriate format. I communicate actively and constructively. I encourage all perspectives to be considered, and I value the contributions of my team members. And I constructively build on contributions of others and integrate my work with everyone else's. Oh, thank you. Okay, there's another little section here. Oops, did I skip through? Oh yeah, I did. So the next section is planning and management. I take on an appropriate role in the group as needed, for example, as a leader or the note taker. I clarify goals and plan tasks, activities, and projects in coordination with other team members. I report to my team on progress. The next area on fostering a team climate. I ensure consistency between my words, tone, facial expression, and body language. It's an interesting part of collaboration that maybe we didn't think about. I am positive and optimistic about team members, tasks, activities, and or projects. Depends on the day, right? Right? But we do hope that we're assuming that that positive intent, that most people are trying their best. and we can give them the benefit of the doubt that they are trying their best. Avoiding gossip, avoiding doubting them, being a good team member. And I can use my emotional intelligence to help me appropriately communicate and empathize with others on my team. And the last section is managing potential conflict. So I display appropriate assertiveness, neither dominating, submissive, or passive aggressive. So in your approach to conflict, I contribute to healthy debate. And I respond and manage direct and indirect conflict constructively and effectively. So these assessments are in the Fusion module. We're kind of going through them really quickly. So I would encourage you to kind of take some time and go through the module to understand these different areas. But essentially, this little checklist is really helpful for you, kind of just understanding what are the components of being a team member, and where am I on this spectrum. I joked, but like it depends on, sometimes I'm have my, wearing the best hat that I'm wearing and I'm, a great team player, right? But if I'm extra stressed or hungry or tired or whatever, right? That might contribute to how I sound in a team meeting or how patient I am with my team members. And we can, give ourselves a little bit of grace, give other people a little bit of grace. But we should be kind of thinking about, where are we on this kind of spectrum of, am I always doing this? Am I usually doing this? Or is this something I never even thought about doing as a team member? And that might give you a little bit of a clue, let's say, as to where you might want to focus some of your energy this summer in terms of developing your skill. So, if your score is 2 or less in an area, that means you might want to develop some of the skill in that area. If your score is 4 or higher for that area, you're doing pretty good. It's not something you want to just pretend you don't have to think about ever, because it's still something you'll be practicing. But it's an area that you have some skill and ability in. So we'll just kind of overview a few of the tips. Again, so much of this is in the module, and I'm just giving you a really kind of high level overview of things to kind of take with you. But if you're wanting more support, doing that module online, which counts for your sure hours, we'll have some more in-depth opportunity for you to kind of practice these skills. So tips for collaboration, and it came through really quickly when I asked you what qualities we look for in a team member, but that clear communication. So establishing clear communications early on, or understanding the communication processes. So when you're working in a lab, you probably have a supervisor or a team of folks you're working with. And if you haven't already discussed, best practices for communication, that might be something you want to clarify, right? So do you prefer email communications or do we text? I know depending on the project students have been working on, there's some immediacy in the work that you're doing. And so maybe a text is the best way of getting a hold of your supervisor. However, that doesn't mean you should be texting them after hours, late at night, for no reason, right? So just developing that professionalism to know when something is an emergency that you need to text, or if it should be an email, or if you use, Discord or Teams or whatever channel. This is a tip as well for when you're working on group projects in the regular school year, right? So you work with, people you've never worked with before. How do we want to communicate? Is it text chain on WhatsApp or email, right? Setting some kind of expectations, because there's nothing worse than not hearing from anyone on your team and not knowing how to get a hold of them. You might also want to think about how you communicate and what your style is. There's kind of a little overview of some of the different communication styles. We usually have a combination of a few, and it depends on, if we're with our best friends, or if we're with, strangers, or if we're at work, or, in our personal lives. We might switch between a couple different styles. But essentially, an analytical communication style is someone who really wants to know the data. They want to know facts. They want evidence and information before they can really communicate or make a decision. Intuitive styles really want to know about where it gets you and what the bottom line is, kind of thinking through a little bit of those emotions as well, which that personal style is really about feelings, being connected, being involved. How does this make you feel, right? Some people really need to have that personal connection in their communication. And for example, in my office, I know of a couple folks who really have that more personal communication style. So when I meet with them, I always ask, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? What did you do? Right? I have a couple other people on my team who don't need that type of conversation. They actually don't like it. So I go to them with evidence and peer-reviewed articles and facts and figures. And so I kind of know who my audience is, and I kind of switch my approach depending on kind of what I think and anticipate they might want from the communication. And also thinking about how you might adapt your communication for different audiences. So I know that's a big thing we talk about in the SURE program, because you'll be doing that. You might be doing the storytelling competition or the symposium, and how you talk about your research to your supervisor and your peers in the workplace or in the lab is going to be a lot different than how you talk to folks at the symposium. Um, and that's a part of that knowledge mobilization, that science communication, right? Helping others make it make sense. I have a friend who's doing his PhD in physics. I always have to tease him about this. And he's probably one of the smartest people I know. And I always tease him. I said, dumb it down, dumb it down. I don't know anything about this. Can you make it make sense to me? And it's really a challenge for him, because he understands all of the different language and lingo and concepts, right? So it's been fun to kind of tease him and challenge him to kind of break down his science knowledge to someone who has no science knowledge. Right? And so that's really effective for writing grants and getting funding, and for future job applications. It's really about telling that story to someone who has never heard it before and doesn't know, the ins and outs. So being able to, communicate to a group of faculty, but also communicate that information to a group of grade 6 students, right? How would you switch your approach? How would you make it make sense? How would you also read the room to anticipate if people are confused or, following along, right? So these are all really important parts of communication and a part of working with others. Another really big part, particularly for undergraduate research this summer, because it is such a short period of time, May to September or May to August, right? Not a lot of time. You'll be kind of hitting the ground running, right? And so understanding what your role is and what your responsibilities are is really important. So clarifying with your direct supervisor. There's no syllabus that tells you, exactly what you're going to do and when it's due, right? So you're going to have to manage that on your own. When in doubt, ask your direct supervisor, and don't just do what other people are doing. There's probably some reasons as to why, people have different workloads. They could be a grad student. They could be actually a permanent person in this workspace, right? And so that's going to be a different, they're going to have different expectations for their work in comparison to you. So really understanding your role and your responsibilities, asking questions when you need to, going to your supervisor for clarity, but also challenging yourself to figure it out a little bit on your own before just, coming with questions. See if you can ask around or if you can observe, and then clarify with your direct supervisor if there's anything that you're unsure about in the workplace. Yeah, and then the last kind of tip is acknowledge that conflict and misunderstandings are probably going to happen. And once we just kind of accept that, it makes them a little bit easier to manage when they do happen. And really and makes us a little bit more aware when we're communicating that there's always a potential for misunderstanding, even if you think you made the most clear statement out there and it would be obvious, to everybody. There's a possibility that somebody interprets it differently. And so just anticipating that, acknowledging that that's probably going to happen, and co-creating a plan or process for addressing conflicts or misunderstanding. For summer positions, that might be tricky because you're only there for a few months. But, making sure that you have that good rapport with your direct supervisor to bring up any questions or clarity. And we're going to talk a little bit how to navigate conflict in a couple slides here. So I'll give you a little bit more tip on that. Any questions so far? Oops. Is that me? Oh yeah, there I am. So this is a little story time. Here I am counting chickens in the poultry research barn on campus here. And if you couldn't tell, although I look very happy and in my element, I'm a city girl. I've never spent too much time on the farm. And chickens, baby chicks, are really hard to count when they're moving around. So I was tasked, I was doing some volunteering in the barn. This was a couple years ago. And I was tasked on counting chickens to make sure that there was enough chickens in each little pod. And I promise you I can count. But when they're moving targets, it's really tricky. And so just a little reminder that it's okay not to know something. It's okay to be out of your element. Yeah, it feels a little embarrassing to be like, I'm having a really hard time counting these chickens. I promise you I can count, but it's hard when they're moving. So what I did is, I tried a few times on my own to find a method that worked for me, and it just wasn't working. So I said to my partner that was beside me, who had a lot more experience than I did, I said, oh my gosh, this is hard. I like, what's your strategy? Like, what's your, how do you do this? And it was as simple as you got to count them as you're putting them into the box. And it just wasn't something that was intuitive to me. And it was so simple. And it actually ended up creating some humor. We laughed about it. The person I asked for help, we ended up kind of developing a little bit of a bond through me being, transparent that I didn't know how to count chickens in a box. And so I share that story with you to just, normalize feeling a little bit out of our comfort zone. That's okay. That's how we learn. Failure is usually a learning opportunity. So as soon as we kind of, get over the fact that we might make mistakes and we might fail, and we see it as an opportunity for learning, it actually makes the work more enjoyable, and it kind of takes a bit of pressure off us. Asking for help, balancing that independent problem solving with asking for help, right? So I gave it a shot for, whatever, 10-15 minutes. And then I said, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And then I got the help, right? Not just avoiding, this was real research I was, counting chickens for. And if I just miscounted them, that would have messed up their whole, project that they had for these chickens, for different trials they were doing on these chicks, right? So we don't want to risk, messing up research or data collection. So we need to be honest. We need to have that integrity, and we need to be comfortable asking for help when we need it. We also have there that honesty is usually the best policy. Of course, there's different ways of being honest. Being blunt is not the same as being honest. But being truthful about our experience, and being, transparent when we're struggling or when something's not working for us. Another tip that I have is just to document your conversations and time spent on work. I think we mentioned that at the beginning session for sure, that documenting your time and what you did is a really good practice for your summer research, but also into your career. There's lots of situations where HR might be wanting to confirm your hours that you worked, or wanting to make, when you're reporting your hours, you might think you remembered every day that you went to work and what time, but our memories aren't as good as we think they are. So documenting the work you're doing, and then following up with verbal conversations with an email summary is another really good practice for collaboration, because you might have heard something in that conversation, or you might have missed something in that conversation. So following up with a written email is a really helpful way of kind of creating that paper trail, so that you can go back on correspondence and have kind of, some historical data on what conversations have already taken place. Okay, now we're moving into constructive dialogue. Do we have any questions on collaboration? I think any questions we might have might be answered by constructive dialogue, because these two go really closely together. If you guys were in the room, I'd want to hear from you what you think constructive dialogue is, because it's not like a skill we think of very often, but it's one we certainly could benefit from. But this is essentially focusing on understanding and exploring different perspectives instead of trying to just win the argument or prove others wrong. And that's what we mean by constructive dialogue. So you can certainly disagree or not see it the same way, But when we have constructive dialogue, we are asking more questions, we're trying to see the other side. And it allows us really to focus on different, instead of focusing on differences, focus on what's common or what's mutual in the way we see this. So working on teams, when we have conflict with our team member, having some constructive dialogue skills will be really important for allowing that communication and potential conflict to be managed and not just avoided, right? Avoiding conflict doesn't actually get rid of it. It just puts it somewhere else where it will likely blow up. So again, I have another little self-assessment. This is a shorter one, just because I knew we would be kind of tough on time here today. But some elements of constructive dialogue that I'd love for you to self-assess. Is it never, seldom, sometimes, usually, always that you practice these skills? So just kind of, follow along, write down your number, your score. So I regulate my emotions in conversations to stay grounded and limit getting upset. Again, I can't say always. Depends on the time. Yeah, exactly. I can go into my room and scream in silence afterwards. Yeah. And again, it's not going to be perfect, right? Like if I'm talking to my parents or my sister, I'm going to be more on that sometimes, seldom area, right? If I'm in professional conversations, always to usually, right? Depending on, oh, the lights just dimmed. Oh, and they came back on. That was unique.
We were moving around the room now.
Was that it?
Active
Okay.
learning. I wanted active learning.
Yeah. So I pay attention to tone and body language that people use and try to respond accordingly. Before commenting on an issue, I make sure to understand it clearly. I encourage others to be, yeah, that's an interesting one, right? So we might judge something, we might be quick to assume we know the answer, but I think curiosity is really important in teamwork and in constructive dialogue, right? When we assume we know the other person's intention or other person's perspective, we are signing ourselves up for some trouble because we don't know other people's experience and perspectives. So we have to be open, we have to be curious. I encourage others to be transparent and honest with me, even when uncomfortable or with uncomfortable or difficult subjects. I ask clarifying questions when I want to better understand points in an argument. I support my arguments with facts and examples to strengthen my points. And there we go. I approach differences among people with curiosity rather than judgment. So again, this was a shortened version of the fuller self-assessment. And again, this is a really good kind of guide for you to kind of understand where you're at in constructive dialogue skills, and which areas you might want to focus a little bit more of your attention on to improve that skill area. And these, again, are skills that you have, skills that you've been practicing, but they're skills that you're going to continue to need and use into your career, into the future. These are skills that Jordan and I are still practicing and working on, depends on the day and the group of people, right? But, we are always collaborating on campus. And actually what the institution is meant to do is really, have constructive dialogue, to debate ideas, to consider multiple perspectives and pathways forward. That's good science, right? That's good research. That's good teamwork. That's a good democracy, right?
I think a big part of that constructive dialogue piece is the listening side of things. And I think that's I had a grandmother who always said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
Because you should be listening twice as much as you're talking.
Yeah.
And when we say listening, we mean like actually listening and not just waiting for your turn to speak again. And I think that's a big part of the constructive part of the dialogue is listening and then reacting to what you've heard in a way that takes the conversation forward in a positive way, and the way that moves whatever task you have that you're dialoguing about forward in a way that everybody's going to be satisfied with, in a way that everybody's going to be comfortable with, having heard them and what their actual, what their opinions are, what their background is, what their sort of perspectives are on it, and trying to find, like you say, a way to to find those commonalities between what you believe and what they believe and how that can move it forward.
Yeah.
Something our politicians need to think about a little harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and we could talk all about that because this is really part of, yeah, my own research area was how we can improve being able to hold space with people who don't see the things
Yeah.
the same way that we do. Because when we just stop engaging with them, then we are creating different silos, different sectors of people who don't collaborate, which is where we get into trouble in society, but also workplaces and on teams and in households, right? Yeah, we could tell you some stories about constructive dialogue in my family. Yeah, and so yeah, listening is a really important part of understanding and collaborating and being constructive in our conversations with people. I think that came up right away in the skills we look for in a teammate. We'll listen to Jordan's grandma, 2 ears, 1 mouth, so double the listening to the hearing. And we always, something I try to keep in mind is that listening to understand rather than respond. I'm a very energetic kind of ADHD. I have ADHD. So I always want to talk and I want to, and I have to be mindful of talking over people. And it shows that I think it shows that I'm excited and engaged, but other people interpret it as talking over them and being disrespectful. Even though that's not my intent, that's how it can be interpreted. And so, I've had to work on that and share with people who know me really well or people who I know I'm gonna have to work with. That when I get animated, it's because I'm excited and engaged, not that I'm trying to take over the conversation. So, and you can recognize that in other people too, right? And rather than just saying, "Oh, she's so rude," she always, controls the conversation. Modeling the behavior that we want to see in other people. So in the last few minutes here, just kind of going over this really quickly. But we kind of already talked about this a lot, but constructive dialogue really respects diversity and promotes inclusion of kind of different ways of doing, believing, and experiences, right? So not everybody's going to have the same experience, perspective, or values of you as you, and that's actually okay. It takes a lot to realize that. Yeah, it's been hard, I wish people saw things the way that I do, and then, it'd be all great. No, it wouldn't. It would be, a bunch of me's all over the place, which we don't need, right? So diversity actually creates, it's that the analogy of the forest, right? So a forest that doesn't have any biodiversity is a very vulnerable forest. It's vulnerable to blight and illness. It's vulnerable to forest fires. It's not a very functional forest. A forest that has a lot of diversity is a really strong, successful forest that's going to prevail even when there's wildfires, even when there's drought, even when there's, illness in the ecosystem. So diversity actually helps us survive and thrive. And so the trick is finding a way to kind of find those common denominators despite the differences. Constructive dialogue also requires a high amount of emotional intelligence, or at the very least, emotional awareness. So emotions are information, but it's not the full story. So when somebody is getting emotional, it usually has something to do with something else that's going on. Or it's something that's already happened to them that's kind of triggering, this emotional reaction. So when we're having conversations or we're getting into potentially some conflict, just understanding our emotions and that body-mind connection. Often our body will know that we're being triggered before we consciously know we're being triggered. So are you holding your fists? Are you clenching your jaw? Are you shifting in your seat a little bit? These are clues that you're getting a little bit stressed, that your synthetic nervous system is getting heightened. And once that our nervous system is activated in that way, neurologically, it's really hard to rationalize. And you can have all of the evidence and all of the facts, but when people are in an emotional state, it really doesn't, they can't really comprehend it. It's our brain can't comprehend it. It's not that person. It's just the brain has gone into fight or flight. and there's no reason or rationalizing that can happen until we calm down that nervous system. So recognize those signals in yourself, your stress signals, as well as in other people, and start having some practices, right? So why don't we take a break? Let's take a break. I need a drink. I need to go to the bathroom. I'm hungry. That's easy to do. You also, I've noticed some people, and I do this too, but like if you're rubbing your hands, you start to pay more attention to your body. That helps your brain drop back into your body and not be out here thinking and spiraling about all the possibilities. So being mindful in, some finger kind of touching your fingers, counting on your fingers, doing some breathing, taking a break. There's lots of other kind of mindfulness techniques that can be used. It's hard to do when you're in the moment in a conflict, right? Which would be, reading the room. Is it a good time to take a break? Is it a good time to, maybe use some humor to lighten things up? Be careful with that. Sometimes it's not appropriate to use humor, right? But this is a trial and error thing too. So, starting to pay attention to, what the needs are in the room, and what your needs are too. Okay. Couple other slides and then we'll wrap up. So tips for communications, so asking those clarifying questions. Can you tell me more about this? Or I never thought about it like that. Can you tell me more about your perspective here? Or how does this connect to the other research we're doing? Or how does this connect to our goal here? Those are clarifying questions. And rather than just assuming the answers, right, have that curiosity to clarify, because you might learn something that you weren't expecting. Yes and approach is really helpful as opposed to okay, but, or sure, but, or but. When you say but, it kind of shuts down that collaboration, right? So yes, and so I think this is really important. Yes, that is important. And so is this, right? So kind of using that approach to kind of merge ideas and not just shut them down because it's different than yours. And two priorities can be a priority at the same time, right? Two things can be equally as important. So that yes and really helps to kind of put them on the same level and helps to avoid people shutting down. Because as soon as you say, okay, but you might hurt some feelings, or the collaboration just isn't there anymore, right? Because you've shut it down with the but. This is something I have to work on. So yes, and is a good practice for that. Using I statements when appropriate. Again, when appropriate, right? So if somebody's always late to a meeting, rather than being like, you're always late, which is very confrontational, something like, it's important for me and for the rest of us to start our meetings on time so that we can make our schedule work afterwards, right? So completely different impact on that person. Still addressing the issue of somebody being late, right? But rather than being like, you're always late, making a more I statement approach, which is I prefer, and for the team, it's best when we start on time. And then BIF responses are also really helpful for email or written conversations or correspondence, but you can also start practicing them in your personal life. And that QR code will take you to kind of like a little tutorial on how to write those BIF responses. But essentially, it's keeping things brief, keeping things informative, being friendly, but also being firm. So having those boundaries, being kind, being curious, but also being firm on what your priorities are, what your capacity is. Yeah. And just about at the end, giving and receiving feedback is another big part of constructive dialogue and being on a team as well as being on a student. As a student, you get a grade. As an employee, you get performance reviews. And there are opportunities to improve, right? And so when we begin feedback with gratitude, that really shifts the way we interpret the feedback. So feedback is a gift for growth and connection. It's the same thing with failure. When we see failure as a learning opportunity, it's not that scary. When we see feedback as a growth opportunity and a connection opportunity, So somebody's taking the time to give you feedback. That actually means they care. If they didn't care, they would keep that information to yourself themselves, right? Of course, there's a kind way to give feedback, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, when we get feedback, it's an opportunity for us to improve our skill and improve our performance. If anybody's done music or dance or anything like that, you'll know that your coach or your teacher is wanting the best for you, and they're going to give you a lot of feedback so that you can be the best, right? It feels scary at the time, or it feels hurtful, but ultimately they're giving you that feedback so that you can improve, and that is a gift. So kind of switching the way we think about receiving feedback, even on our exams or our papers, when we get written feedback, taking a minute to actually interpret that and engage that. And there's good information there. And so it's going to help you next time. When you're giving feedback, the hamburger approach or the sandwich approach is a really effective way of maintaining good relationships with whoever you're giving feedback for. So the hamburger is that starting with something good or positive or appreciated, then going to that part where things need to improve a little bit. So that's that critique, and that's that, the feedback on what actually could be improved. And then reaffirming the positive or the possibilities, right? So I really liked your presentation. You had really great visuals. You were fun and engaging to listen to. It was really entertaining. Slow down when you talk, because sometimes, this is me critiquing myself. Slow down when you talk. I know when you get nervous, you talk faster. Pause, ask for questions throughout your presentation. But ultimately, all of these things are going to contribute to you being a better presentation or public speaker, right? So that sandwich of good, critique, and then wrapping it up with something positive. The other part of feedback, and it kind of connects back to those boundaries, is being proactive in taking care of your well-being needs. So when we're stressed or unwell or tired, feedback can feel really heavy, and it can be really hard to digest. And we can't always choose when we get feedback. It might come on our worst day when we're already really struggling and everything else is going wrong. So taking care of your well-being kind of goes back to those boundaries, right? Knowing when it's time to work hard, but taking care of yourself as well. So that when you do get feedback, you're in a good place to integrate that and receive it, right? It's hard to give feedback to somebody who is really struggling because they're just not in a place to receive that either. And also don't forget that well-being is not just physical, it's that psychological, your emotional, your social, right? Are you connected to your community? Are you taking care of your emotional needs? Are you physically taking care of yourself? And then, if there's, some other underlying, well-being needs that you might have on your own journey. Where are we now? Some more resources. This is a really tricky skill. Of course, you can do the Fusion module and learn more about it, but there are some articles and videos and TED Talks and things like that that you can kind of listen to or watch to kind of get an understanding of this skill. And last, before I sign off and see if there's any questions, I'm with Career Services. We do all sorts of career education, career coaching, mock interviews, resume cover letter reviews, or just somebody to talk through while you're kind of planning your future or you're pivoting in your future, which happens. And we're here for current students and alumni. So even after you graduate, you can still use our services. So I'd encourage you to come say hi and come meet some of our coaches. And we have different events and opportunities throughout the year and throughout the summer. So come check us out. Yeah. Any questions?